I don't understand. You liked me first. You popped up to me first. And now that I show a little interest, poof, you're gone.
Damn, don't nobody want me? Nobody. Me, I want you. I I want you. So you telling me nobody really want me?
Hello, guys. All right, so just to talk quickly about those TikTok videos, it's funny to say that to see, I should say, that there's such a lack of content for the male aspect of the community. As I was going through and I was looking for TikToks to discuss the male portion of how dating in South Korea is, I couldn't find any. This is really like the only one. But today we're going to be talking about an article which states why young people in South Korea are staying single despite efforts to spark dating. And this article is written by The Conversation. It's written by Miss Yu Kian, as we can hear, but we're going to hear her thoughts and her research on dating in South Korea. Let's hop into it. Recent reports about a sex recession among young Americans aside, the concept of dating and mating is reasonably ingrained in daily life in the West. In sharp contrast, South Korea, 40% of people in their 20s and 30s appear to have quit dating altogether. Today, many refer to young Koreans as the Sampo generation, literally giving up on three, because they have given up on these three things: dating, marriage, and children. And so, as we see here, guys, is that many young Koreans, men and women, have essentially looked at how dating is, and they're starting to step out. But I'd argue that this is more on the male side, you know. And then, as we see more men step out, obviously the women are going to follow. But obviously, if men are getting bad deals over here in marriage, dating, marriage, and having children, they're going to walk away. Let's continue. Although Confucian culture originated in China, many scholars believe that South Korea is even more influenced by Confucianism. Confucian values emphasize the importance of marriage and carrying on the family bloodline. Getting married is considered a social responsibility, but young Koreans are increasingly leaving marriage behind. And so, even in countries that we, previously thought were the most, traditional, family oriented, and very, very conservative, are now stepping away from this, guys. And so, a lot of men, they look to if they're having issues dating and marriage, and they look for a potential prospect, of getting a marriage partner, they'll go dating outside of their country, to maybe a different foreigner, maybe a South Korean, maybe a woman from the Dominican Republic, or Puerto Rico, something. They'll go outside their country, to look for a wife. But I know guys in especially in the black community go to the DR, to try to look for women. But that's starting to get heavily westernized now, where these ideologies are stepping in, and the women there are changing and not becoming very, very good marriage partners. But let's move on. The marriage package. Demographers have used the term marriage package to illustrate the idea that marriage in East Asia entails much more than just a relationship between two people. In traditional Asian families, numerous intrafamilial roles are bundled together, especially for women. Generally speaking, marriage, childbearing, child rearing, and taking care of elderly are linked. Hence, marriage and family roles are a package, which I agree. Once you marry someone, that essentially your communities become linked together. It's how you create communities, where you have uh, mother-in-laws, father-in-laws who own their own businesses and have their own families, connect with a different family, and then as well as the grandparents, and you come all together and you have these communities, and you connect with your friends, and those communities come linked, and everybody's there to help each other out. And that's how you make communities. And without marriage, without that community, you'll see a lot of people don't have incentives to do anything, and the government will start getting involved because this affects, the prospects of making money. But let's continue. South Korea is no exception to endorsing this cultural idea of the marriage package. Nevertheless, Western individualistic ideologies are increasingly influencing young Koreans. Despite a traditional emphasis on marriage, they have begun to postpone and even forego marriage. Like I said before, guys, the Western individualistic ideologies, Western ideas, of these progressive movements, these modern modern movements are uh, are changing the way people think, men and women. But I would argue that there's a strong emphasis on the women's portion of this that have changed the way they think and the way we think. And so a lot of people are just saying, "Hey, this is a bad deal. I'm stepping away." The average age at first marriage in South Korea jumped 5 years for both men and women from 1990 to 2013. Related to this is the rising number of people who stay single. In 1970, only 1.4% of women between the ages of 30 to 34 were never married. In 2010, this percentage has increased almost 30%. Now, as we see this graph here, the increase, this particular demographic, 30 to 40, um, it's a, common thing among men that we know that in this particular bracket is what you watch out for, is because women, if you're going the whole traditional route of getting married and having a wife, most people know that this age is essentially where they should have been married by now. They should have a family by now, and so men see this bracket of women, and they step away from it. This is typically the bracket where you have single mothers and people who are super damaged, and so a lot of men step away from that unless you're an older gentleman, and you're just looking to remarry, or step back into the marriage game. But a lot of men step away from that demographic, and as we see this, since this demographics has increased, a lot of men are seeing even more women that are now just uh, out of the prospect of dating. You have a whole bracket of women who are just going to be overlooked by men, which isn't good for them. It's not good for anybody. But let's continue. Um, for women, marriage is not an attractive option. I disagree. Uh, in the last decade, The Economist has published articles about the decline of Asian marriage, one of them being from 2011, Asia's Lonely Hearts discussed women's rejection of marriage in Asia and looked to gendered family roles and unequal divisions of housework as culprits. So that's funny. So essentially in this article, they're basically blaming the fact that women, have particular roles. That since they're the only ones that can give birth, they have that particular role. They're blaming that, and they're also honestly they're blaming specifically that, but they're blaming certain undeniable things that we've done for years. That's just been known. The man goes off to work. And the woman cares of things at home. It's not because uh, it's a social thing that this is constructed. This is actually something that's just ingrained where men don't have to give birth, so they're and they have a period. They don't have a period of time where they can't work unless they're injured. So it's just easier for them to always be the ones working, plus as well as their genetics. But let's continue. Once men decide to get married, they are generally expected to prioritize familial responsibilities. Women take on a much greater share of the housework and childcare burden and are chiefly responsible for their children's educational success. My research shows that in 2006, 46% of married Korean women between 25 and 54 were full-time housewives. Korean wives, whom of many are working outside of the home, did over 80% of the housework, whereas their husbands did less than 20%. So of course, they did less than 20%. If you're gonna have a woman that's gonna be a full time housewife and she expects a nice, a nice life, but she's not gonna bring forth any money, well, of course the husband's gonna have to get out there, bust his ass, work hella hours just to cover everything in the whole home. Children aren't cheap. I mean, this goes for men and women. Children aren't cheap. So, if you're going to have kids, you're going to have a married life. You have to have someone pulling forward, a decent amount of money, whether it's jointly or partially or just one sided. That money's got to come. And if you're going to be a housewife, then all that's got to come from the husband. all the work burden's coming from the husband. This is a no brainer. So why the fact that women are complaining about this, um, you know, uh, that's crazy. But let's continue. Women have gained more opportunities outside of marriage, but within marriage, men have not correspondingly increased their contribution to housework and childcare. As a result, for many women, being married is no longer an attractive option. With diminishing returns to gender specialized marriage for highly educated women, they are likely to delay or forego marriage, which is interesting because the more highly educated a woman is, the less partners she has to select from. Um, Men will date across and down, but women won't. They'll only date across and up. So if a man is less educated than her, she's less likely to date. So that also includes her into this, where essentially you're actually getting rid of some opportunities for marriage partners, the people who could be highly compatible with them. But let's continue. Precarious economy and the overwork culture. Another important reason young Koreans are giving up on dating, getting married, and raising kids is the growing economic uncertainty and financial hardships. Many young Koreans work precarious jobs with low and little job and income security. Moreover, the long working hours prevails in South Korea among OECD countries. South Korea has the longest work hours. Well, of course, if you're out, like I said, if you're the husband, you're pulling in all the income for the household or over 80% of it, then not I'm not household work, but income, then you're not going to have time to do these things. It's going to be hard to do those things. But the thing is if you're able to do them before you get married, then you have a huge boost and boon to your opportunities. But let's continue. In 2017, Koreans worked an average of 2,024 hours per year, 200 hours less than they did in the previous decade. To put this number into perspective, Canadians worked 300 hours less than a year than Koreans did, and the French, who are better at work-life balance, worked 500 fewer hours. Okay, so recently, the South Korean government has passed a law which cut the maximum weekly work hours down to 52, which is down from 68, hoping that Koreans could still have some personal life after work. This is a terrible idea. This is something I was just saying, that if you have, let's say, a guy who's a young man, say in his 20s, he he has the ability to bust his ass on work to get that 68 hours, get that money to save up, and progressively increase his financial scalability, right? So once he had more money, it gets easier to do dating, getting married, and raising kids. But if the government's going to pass a law that says, hey, you can only work 52, that young man gets screwed out of working, or that guy gets screwed out of working, so he can produce less money for his family or potential family. I don't think this is a good idea. But let's continue. Lowest fertility rate in the world. Well, it is rare for single women to have children. 1.5% of births were to unmarried mothers in Korea, as compared to the overall OECD average of 36.3%. Excuse me. Therefore, there is a real consequence of marriage foregone. South Korea is among the countries with the lowest fertility rate in the world. Countries need about 2.1 children per woman to sustain their population. In Korea, the average births per month were slightly above one in 2016. Whoa, this means that they're not putting out enough people. With less people, that means that you're not going to have people working the jobs that not only sustains your infrastructure but also produces enough money to have growth, so your nation won't grow. Usually nations are inflammatory, where you have growth rather than not a decline. So, especially for civilizations, you want to see them increase, not decrease. Uh, the government probably won't stand for this, and they won't stand for this, because if you have less growth in your country. That means all the people who are currently sustained and living in it are going to be suffering consequence by less births, by less growth. But birth rates are extremely low. However, people are living longer. South Korean women were likely live longer, likely have the highest female life expectancy. South Korean women born in 2030 are expected to live longer than 90 years. Therefore, the Korean population is aging rapidly. A shrinking population will create a labor crisis, limiting economic development. The New York Times called this demographic doom South Korea's most dangerous enemy, which I agree. You have stories of it was in Japan, I believe it was, where they have a lot of stories where you have these older women, I believe sometimes older gentlemen, but mostly older women dying in their homes because they have no one to take care of them, and then the bodies just rotting, and their neighbors find or someone finds them after weeks after the bodies started to decompose. And it's because they're not married and no one's there to look out. But let's continue. The Korean government attempted to increase birth rates and enforced a policy that all the lights in the ministry's buildings should be turned off at 7 p.m. sharp once a month with the hopes that employees would get off work early and go home to make love and, more importantly, babies. This is not going to happen. This is a terrible idea. And this plays a part of the other issue that I noticed before is that if they're not able to work as many hours, you're cutting them down here, and you're also cutting the hours down here. People aren't be able to even build the amount of money they need to start a family, so or sustain one. So we'll continue, but will forcefully switching off the lights work, maybe changing the culture of long working hours and abolishing gendered work and family rules will be more effective. This is essentially the end of this this article. But this is incorrect as well. This is maybe changing, as a suggestion. This is not a good suggestion because if we look at egalitarian countries, we see that, and shout out to Dr. Jordan B. Peterson, we see that there's actually an increase, in productivity, uh, because that there are gendered work and there are family roles are more emphasized. We see greater increases. And the thing is that if you abolish these things, that people will be essentially lost because if you have a young boy, right, and he's trying to find his way, he's going to look to other men who've worked, particular jobs, and most, as we know, most men work the more grueling, difficult jobs. He can get his advice from them and learn things. But if you're going to abolish gendered work, right, what's going to happen is you're going to have more and more people lost within the workforce, working pointless jobs instead of things that we need, like electricians, plumbers, and STEM STEM field jobs. If we're going to have less of those, what's going to happen is that you're going to have these kids being lost, and they're also going to get lost into these pointless jobs like cashiers, and makeup artists, entertainment. These are good jobs, but they don't make the world go around. They don't keep the lights on at night. So we're looking at a crisis coming up on our hands. And this says love, sex in South Korea, statistics and facts. I'm gonna scroll down here. I'm just gonna read this um, last little bit here. So, themes of love and relationships are heavily ingrained in South Korean media, ranging from dramas, movies, even K-pop songs. Additionally, Korean television is overflowing with couple matching programs. However, between youth unemployment and unstable socioeconomic situations, younger generations are more concerned with financial stability and their own health than feeling the love of family or a partner. Young Koreans in their 20s and 30s have been labeled as the threepo, the sampo in Korean generation, known for giving up on love, getting married, and giving birth. The overall decline in the numbers of partners people have before marriage each year is an example of this trend. And that's going to close out this article. just to show you that even, on a site that bases their evidence on statistics, is showing that, hey, we have these young people giving up on marriage, and there's not a lot of incentive for these guys to go ahead and get married and copulate and build our society. And this is a huge issue that is, in Eastern cultures, more traditional cultures, is now getting affected by this. This isn't just in the West now. This isn't just an issue of the West. This is a modern problem, and it's strange to see that more progressive movements are telling people that, hey, do this, and we're getting negative results. But that's going to be all for today. Thank you guys for listening, and see you next time.